Iron Maiden are one of the most unique, recognizable, and celebrated bands in rock history. While not traditionally popular in the Billboard sense, Iron Maiden has maintained a huge worldwide fan base for decades, which speaks highly of their integrity, artistry, and ability to make music that speaks to the very core of humanity, crossing all demographics and resonating with all kinds of different people. They have progressed their sound considerably over the years, never falling into a trendy pocket, and all the while merging with each new era of popular music and still managing to retain their own unique sound. Many rock music fans will at least have heard of Iron Maiden by name, and many of their songs also get regular rotation on rock music stations to this day. Many people have even heard one or more of their songs and not known who the band was. So many hard rock and heavy metal bands in the 80s had a vocalist who used his higher register often, as does Bruce Dickinson, thus blending Iron Maiden in with the times, at least to a degree. That being said, Bruce Dickinson's voice is often the first thing rock music fans recognize and sometimes dislike due to his particular style. However, Iron Maiden began their recording careers with another vocalist, Paul Di'Anno, who fronted the band through 1981's Killers before being replaced on tour by Bruce Dickinson. Di'Anno had a more raw and punkish quality to his voice, which suited much of their older material. He could also sing fairly well, but just couldn't keep up with the progressive sound the band ended up taking, as well as the grueling touring schedule. This led to his dismissal after he began abusing drugs and alcohol under the stress of the band's increasing popularity. Today we will be discussing Iron Maiden's debut album, which was technically their second release after 1978's demo, The Soundhouse Tapes. Let us venture onward into 1980's Iron Maiden. Okay, first of all, I want to preface this by saying that this is a great debut album. Some bands' first effort or two are kind of lackluster, but Iron Maiden really stormed onto the scene with this album. They had been around since '76, and so they were able to firmly establish their initial sound, and by the time they got around to recording this album, they had been playing a lot of these songs for a couple years, so that really shows. It's really solid instrumentally. They established their presence with this album, and that being said, what I'm about to say is likely to get me crucified by hardcore Iron Maiden camp fans. This is my least favorite album by them. It's also their lowest rated, consequently. And while it does have some superb tracks, it also has some of their weakest songs. Outside of a few B-sides I've heard, but I'll cover some of those in another video. My reasoning for such a low rating stems from the fact that I spent the better part of the last 5 months really trying to analyze their albums across their whole career, side by side, and I've talked in some of my videos about that. I don't need to go into details about my process, but I really tried to nail down all aspects, scrutinizing everything that I could. The dynamics, the instrumentation, the passion, the soul behind the music, what they're really trying to convey through the lyrics, and combined with the instruments. And I tried not to let a cool riff or sentimentality override my better judgment while I was doing that. So, the fact is, Iron Maiden's grown a lot over the decades, and really dug deeper within themselves on future records. And this one didn't come from the catacombs or the basement, so to speak. They had just begun to discover what they could do with their instruments, and so I think that they were either unsure of how deep they could dig, or maybe a little insecure about how much of themselves they wanted to bear so early on before they had established themselves, and possibly alienate themselves from really making an impact in people. But whatever the case might be, this is what they came up with at the time, and it's a good album in some ways, and it's a weak album in other ways. That's the way it goes, you know, bands start off somewhere, and this is where they started. It's a pretty decent album, but we'll go track by track here in a moment, and I'll let you know what I thought about each song, strengths and weaknesses. Some songs I had more critical things to say about, and some songs I didn't have as much negative criticism to say, but we're going to do a track-by-track analysis now, and you guys are going to get to see where I'm coming from and how I established the rating for this song. So, let's move on. Okay, so Prowler It's got a really strong opening. It's high energy track with a lot of energy. You can really tell they liked playing it. The vocal harmony during the verse is pretty solid. Drumming is superb. The lyrics are really creepy, dealing with a guy sitting in the bushes touching himself, watching people walk by. So that's interesting and a little bit unnerving aspect of human nature, but nonetheless a good character study. The instrumental passage in the middle is really well done. Some prog rock elements, really shredding guitar solos, segueing back into the verse. And on some neutral notes, this was the first song that they ever did with the extended jam at the end, following tradition of some of their influential bands, The Who, Led Zeppelin, and Rush. And there's also no traditional chorus, which I thought was interesting. It kind of just bounds along until the instrumental breakdown. And yeah. So negative things to say about this. The guitar riffs for the verses aren't really synced properly. They're kind of a delay on them. So a little bit of a technical criticism more than the song itself. But nonetheless, something to note that you can notice. And also the song overall is pretty repetitive, not extremely adventurous, other than the instrumental breakdown having the prog rock influence. So overall, here's what I gave it. I give Prowler a 9.15 out of 13. Okay, so Sanctuary, overall it's a really solid, as far as the instrumentation goes, nice crunchy sounding guitar riffs, and there's a really cool passage in the middle. It's in kind of a bridge, and a little bit of free sounding guitar, and nice solos and harmonies. The story told through the lyrics is pretty good. It's a little repetitive at times, but overall tells a really good story about a guy seeking asylum after committing some sort of a crime. But the track is well mixed, better than Prowler was, and the solos are really well done as well. On some negative notes, it's a pretty repetitive main riff, and it's noticeable after a while. This was the second lowest rated song on the album for me. And overall the vibe is just kind of lacking. There's not a lot of depth to it. You don't really identify with the character as much as a lot of other songs that they've done over the years. So here's the final rating. I give Sanctuary 6.75 out of 13. Okay, Remember Tomorrow. Overall, the song's got a really nice vibe, very laid back, and it flows well. There's a good layering and texture to the guitars, which I really liked. And the bridge in the middle picks up the tempo. Overall, this song is a pretty low tempo song and carries on some really nice guitar riffs for a while and some good soloing. And the ending riff just before it segues back into the low tempo I really was fond of as well. The drums fit the song really well, very good pacing by Clive Burr on this one, and the vocals by Paul Di'Anno during the main verses with the lower tempo were really well done, fits his range very well. And on a negative note, just a small criticism though, not a ton of soul, which is why it got a slightly lower rating, a pretty average rating, but it was pretty strong for this album, so overall I recommend this song. And there's its final rating. Remember Tomorrow gets an 8.34 out of 13. Okay, Running Free. Kind of a fan favorite. They play it somewhat at their concerts. It does have a really cool pounding drum beat that sets the tempo well for the song, and the guitar riffs are very free-spirited and flow well, fitting the lyrics well of the song about a guy cutting loose and living his life, but also getting tangled up with the law. The bass line by Steve Harris is really solid as well. On a neutral note, the riffing on the guitars is fairly simplistic overall. There's not a lot of punch to them, but they're fairly solid. And on some negative notes, the song overall doesn't have a lot of passion to it. It just is kind of there. Just a average-ish rock song, you know. And the chorus is pretty repetitive. Vocal harmony is out of sync. That's another technical criticism and not actually the song itself. But also the arrangement, I thought was oversimplistic, which whatever on that. It's an average song, so there's what it gets for a rating. Running Free gets a 6.5 out of 13. Alright, Phantom of the Opera, the peak of this album in my opinion. The intro riff really brings you into the fold and never lets up. It's a really strong guitar harmony leading into the pre-verse, and the main verse riff itself sets the stage well for the rest of the song. The tone is there, it really has a good driving tempo, and works really well with the lyrics, which are also well done. There's an interesting passage that I really like at around 2 minutes in, a little bit more, that kind of sounds like a similar style to System of a Down, so I'm not sure if they were influenced by this song or not, but it sounds to me like they might have been. It's a really well done passage, and fits well with the progressive rock motif that they really worked well with on this song. They did a lot of tempo shifts, a lot of extended instrumental passages, and solid instrumentation by everybody. The bass lines are awesome, especially one around 3.5 minutes or a little bit before. Steve Harris is a phenomenal bass player, very underrated, and he really showcases a lot of his chops on this song. There's a lot of passion and soul in this song, which is another reason I'm heavily drawn to this, and the vocal harmonies when used are done really well, and the transitions and tempo shifts between the different instrumental passages in the middle of the song are done very well, being abrupt but at the same time working very well and not feeling disjointed or forced. There's an instrumental section about 4.5 minutes into the song as well that's among my favorite in any of their songs, and the transition from the previous movement does really well and just brings you in and doesn't let up throughout this whole different set of passages, like a classical musical arrangement the way they wrote this song, and it's awesome. The guitar solo at the end of this passage leading back into the verse again after the extended instrumental sections is done really well. About 5.5 minutes I think into the song, and it's just amazing. All the instrumentals in this song really convey the message well and the subject matter of the lyrics, and really put you in that situation. On a note of criticism, the main riff does work well, but at the same time it does get a little repetitive, so that's about all I have to say as far as critical aspects of this song. So Phantom of the Opera, highly recommend looking this one up. It's my favorite song on this album, set right in the middle of the album, so it's perfect as far as the sequencing goes. And so let's take a look at what I gave it for a rating, shall we? Phantom of the Opera's final rating? It's 12.32 out of 13. Alright, Transylvania, the lone instrumental track on this album. Overall, it's pretty solid. It's got a great opening riff that is a pretty high tempo. The first movement also has a nice breakdown riff with some nice little tempo shifts, kind of a prog influence in there. And the second movement is also solid. Great riffing and good guitar harmonies, and also the guitar solo. The great bridge at the end leading into Strange World has some cool ambient guitar, which sets the stage for the next song with Strange World. Also shares that same guitar setting. And on some negative notes, the first movement gets a little repetitive after a while and takes up quite a bit of the song's time. And the last movement just prior to the ending bridge also repeats a bit too much and has kind of a disjointed feel, which I'm not sure if it's on purpose, but it didn't really sit all that well with me. So here's what the rating is for this particular track. And Transylvania receives an 8.95 out of 13. Alright, Strange World. This song starts off with a bang. Awesome intro with the ambient guitars seeging in from Transylvania, the instrumental, and it keeps that, and the bass and drums feed really well off the guitar. They're giving each other so much, setting the stage for the verses, and the ambience, the solo, the swaying tempo is just, they're just all amazing together. The instruments work really well, and the verses are awesome. Paul's voice is at its peak on this particular song. It's the best vocal song on the album. Really passionate by him, and there's a really nice guitar solo during the middle instrumental passage that's also very passionate and soulful, and overall guitar work in this song is top-notch. Very powerful and ambient, and really conveys the song's message well. The song overall is very solid with a really amazing conclusion, and Paul's voice shines through on that as well. And the only thing I can think of to criticize is that it just lacks a little bit of extra soul and depth that they captured better on some later songs. So let's take a look at what I gave it for a rating. And Strange World's final rating is a 9.87 out of 13. Okay, Charlotte the Harlot, part 1 of a 4-part saga over 4 albums. Not the best, but not the worst. Rockin' opening riff on the bass and guitar. Then there's some good tempo and pacing in the verses. The pre-verse riff has some nice prog rock time signature changes, and there's also a mid-break bridge that leads into some really slower tempo swinging beat. Passionate vocals by Paul trying to, through the character in the story, trying to convince Charlotte to leave her life of prostitution. There's a nice shredding guitar solo after that passage. Neutral note, the lyrics are a little bit cliche at times, but they're okay, telling a decent story. Negative aspect, the chorus is quite repetitive, too much chanting of Charlotte the Harlot, something, Charlotte the Harlot, that, and it repeats 4 times in every verse, so that's the critical aspect I had to say about this song. Alright, let's look at the rating. Charlotte the Harlot receives a 7.6 out of 13. Alright, the concluding track, Iron Maiden, their Swan song, so to speak. They still play this at their concerts. I have a DVD where they play this live in 2003, I think it was. And they could still shred on it. It's got a really cool opening riff. The guitar, it segues into guitar harmonies. Really well done. The pacing in the song is good, with some nice prog rock time shifts here and there. And there's really good fusion of punk and metal. And the riffing and overall flow of the track is solid. Nice breakdown with guitar harmonies and really cool bass and drum fills. And there's a bombastic breakdown ending, you know, the extended instrumental passage, guitar and bass shredding, nice drum fills. Negative aspects, very repetitive, and the verse repeats 3 times, and the chorus is also repetitive, as in the same lyrics are repeated 3 times, so that pegged it down quite a bit. Alright, let's take a look at the rating. And Iron Maiden's final rating is 7.2 out of 13. Okay, so there you have it, a track-by-track analysis of Iron Maiden's self-titled debut album from 1980. Now, we're going to take a look at the average rating of the album itself, and its ranking out of all 15 of their studio albums. And Iron Maiden receives an 8.52 out of 13 average rating, ranking it 15th out of 15 albums. Okay, so above average album by overall rating, but still their weakest album. I still recommend looking up certain tracks, if not the whole album. And I'll be coming at you guys in about 2 weeks with 1981's follow-up effort, Killers, which was the last one with Paul Di'Anno on vocals before he was replaced by Bruce Dickinson. So, look forward to seeing you guys comment and tell me what you think. Thank you very much. I will see you in 2 weeks.